Welcome everybody to this session. We will have three speakers, one in presence and two online. We begin with our first presentation, which will be addressed by Dr. Fanny Krishna and Anaga Paniker, entitled Policy, Polity and Identity of Language Diversity in India. So I would like also to thank our audience online who are with us online, and of course they will have the floor if they have any questions or in our presentations. So we begin with our first presentation. Thank you.
Hello and greetings from University. Firstly, I would like to congratulate FEL 2023 on the successful conduction of this conference. Today our topic is Policy, Polity and the Identity of Language Diversity in India, and this is a collaborative presentation between myself, Anana, and Dr. P. Fanny Krishna. So, the national education policy are these policies that are proposed to reform the educational system in India. And here in this work, we have tried to critically examine the strategies of the national education policies and its impact on the linguistic diversity in India. So, it also attempts to shed light on the issues relating to language in education policy and the intention of the national education policy with special reference to the NEP. The study analyzes and compares the education and language policies in India and evaluates any potential modifications or estimating their effects on the endangered languages. Educational policy is a linchpin in the nation's education system, and these policies they aim to develop cognitive abilities like literacy, numeracy, critical thinking, problem solving, and these cognitive abilities they need to be promoted within an integrated learning environment. The education policies should also aim to promote ideals like social justice, equality, and tolerance. The national education policies have attempted to promote linguistic diversity and linguistic variety by focusing on multilingualism and the idea of mother tongue education. But there have been some gaps in the implementation processes, which are really from a result from a lack of innovative ideas, and we should discuss about these gaps of implementation further in the presentation. So coming to the background of the study, language in education or language in school planning is very frequently overlooked, and it is an essential part of language policy. So Nancy Hornberger has provided an integrated language policy framework that she proposed in 1994, and it constitutes a very coherent language planning framework. And there are many dimensions to language planning, and some of the key elements of her framework include status planning, corpus planning, and acquisition planning. So status planning, it looks at the issues regarding the formal or informal status of a language. So it deals with power dynamics or prestige, language prestige, and social acceptance of language. Corpus planning, it basically looks at language structure and standardization, and on how a grammar or vocabulary or script of a language can be developed. The acquisition planning, it focuses on the actual learning of the language, and there are creating language learning resources and methods. Now coming to the methodology that we have used in this paper, so a comparative analysis of the education and language policies that have been proposed has been conducted, and by incorporating Hornberger's integrated framework model, we have attempted to evaluate these policies, that is the national education policies that were proposed in 1968, 1986 and 2020. Coming to these national education policies, the first national education policy, which was called the National Policy for Education when it was formulated in 1968, and it aimed at the reformation of the education system, and the main ideals that it focused on were national integration and learning of regional languages. It was in this education policy that the three-language policy was proposed, but the implementation process of the three-language policy had a lot of hurdles because of the opposition from the non-Hindi speaking states, who then later just continued to use the two-language policy. So in the three-language policy that was proposed in 1968, it aimed at having three languages that need to be studied from school, and for the non-Hindi speaking states Hindi was the third language, whereas for the Hindi-speaking states, it was proposed that a southern Indian language would be taught to the students. The NEP 1986, that was the second NEP that was implemented in India. It reiterated most of the aspects that are there in the National Education Policy of 1968. It promoted the idea of the use of modern Indian languages as the medium of instruction, but it extended this idea into not just for medium of instruction for school students, but also in the universities as well. So that is what the National Education Policy 1986 talks about. The National Education Policy of 2020 that was implemented in the year 2020, it reintroduced this three-language policy and has also given a lot of emphasis on mother tongue education. So the NEP 2020, like I mentioned before, it just reintroduced the three-language policy of 1968, and though it has been opposed before by the non-Hindi-speaking states, despite that, it has been reintroduced in 2020. So the question really is that why did they have to revive this three-language policy when it was being opposed by so many of the states, especially the state of Tamil Nadu? And also the question arises, how will this policy be implemented without actually imposing language upon the students of certain states? The second issue that we see in the national education policies, especially 2020, but also the previous education policies, is that there exists a gap between the policy framework and the implementation strategies. So for the implementation, for example, for mother tongue education that is emphasized in NEP 2020, a lot of the curricula needs to be revamped, and also a lot of reading materials, resource materials and study materials needs to be published in order to effectively implement mother tongue education. Also, a lot of resource materials and study materials needs to be translated into the local or the regional Indian languages in order to effectively implement mother tongue education, and also to use, if we need to use these regional languages as a medium of instruction. So, as the NEP 2020, it promotes bilingualism and concept of multilingualism, which can really be effectively brought about in school situations when there is a bilingual school setup, bilingual classroom setup. And so for this, there is a need for teachers to be trained, and also proper recruitments of such trained teachers to take place. So teacher training programs need to be set up. The third issue is the gap in addressing the concerns of the preservation of endangered languages. There are many endangered languages in India, and there is a growing concern for linguists to be able to preserve these languages, and not just preserve them, but actually have primers and written materials for the speakers of those languages so that they can revitalize, they can use these resources to revitalize their language. And so the national education policy has not really mentioned, there's a lack of steps that are to incorporate them into the education system. If the national education policy is emphasizing on terms like mother tongue education, then even the languages that are not spoken by a large group of people, the non-dominant languages of the region, must be addressed as well.
Thank you, Anurag, for giving an elaborated discussion on the work. To give a brief idea, as most of you are aware, the diversity that exists in India, there are multiple languages and there are some tribal languages which are still not documented. Various branches of language. In Indian language policy and this education policy, as you're aware, they both go in some sort of hand in hand. And it has played a very crucial role in managing this linguistic as well as the cultural diversity that inherits in this country. Now, India is, like I said, incredibly diverse, and managing this linguistic diversity actually poses challenges and opportunities. Now, how well a policy is made becomes a question, at least to one of the people in this country, because they might be speaking another language. Now, policy has evolved over a time to address many complexities. Like, in a historical context, especially in the case of India, for almost 200, 300 years of colonization, the colonization legacy, the historical influence that the British had on India, it played a very significant role. That's why we had Macmillan model of education until recent times. And English has gained the idea of prestige and power during this colonial period. And it continued even the post-independence after 1947 in India. Now, this language movement came into light somewhere around 1960s. That's where our first policy comes to emergence somewhere around 1968. So this language movement, now post-independence, there were languages-related movement. Now anti-Indian position movement was happening, and there is another movement parallel to it, like let's have Hindi as a lingua franca. rather than English because it is a language of British or because anyway we colonized a long time. Now reflections of these, they were in a great need of balancing. Linguistic diversity or avoiding favoritism was one of favoritism to a single language was happening parallelly. Now in this whole discussion, this national education policy came out somewhere around 19, like Anna spoke just now with regard to 1968. Now this 1968 policy came in this framework of three language formula, emphasizing that study of, let's say, regional languages alongside teaching Hindi uniformly across the country. Now Sanskrit also came in light. Now Sanskrit has also been given that encouraging spirit in this time frame. But then two and a decades later, we had 1986 policy. Now national education policy 1986, it also aimed to the next step, when she was talking about the Burke's model, which talks about the education should be more inclusive, the curriculum should be more inclusive. It will have to look upon not just about what is just not just about education or how student is learning, but outcome. What is the outcome or how inclusive it is? So, based on few of these ideas, somewhere we came up with reducing the social disparities. As you know, India had barriers with regard to caste, and there were particular castes which were not, taking minimum basic education. And this policy has this introduction, or call it introduced measures such as scholarships. Like let's say somebody from a community where they have never been to school or they were never education. Those first generation students were getting scholarship. Adult education was also taken a proper shape. Now, hiring of teachers from other marginalized community also came into light. And after 1986, so for a long period of time, these ideas were going in parallel. But after the emergence of the technology, called it computers, India came, during Rajiv Gandhi's time, somewhere around 80s or somewhere near to early 90s, computers came to India. So the whole system started changing. Now, this policy, the present policy, the 2020 policy, it has its own lapses yet. I think 2020 policy is this amalgamation of many things that took from 68's policy and 86 policy to make it much stronger and make it India-centric sort of education. Now, national education policy reflected on these contemporary concerns that India should have. Let's say, as you're aware, countries like Germany or China or these are examples that I immediately think of. They're producing their research work or theses in their mother tongue or writing in their own script. But in India, it's only in English. Now, 90% of the research. So, this mother tongue based education was a strong idea behind this policy and encouraging multilingualism on contemporary, not just mother tongue education, but yes, you have multilingual policy in there. And there's an idea called inclusive curriculum, and it emphasizes use of more technology and community involvement and so on. Now, these policies, especially policies in recent, that is this NEP 2020, encourages the importance of early education, like I said, mother tongue education, development of cognitive abilities, or in terms of inclusiveness, they are also talking about how specially impaired population should have their teaching. There are few challenges and concerns because after the independence, most of it was English dominance that in academia, the Indian academia took that English dominance in higher education, especially in the urban areas. Now, English has remained the dominant medium of instruction all over the country. Now, this creates a sort of clear disparity for a reason that there are tribal languages, there are widely spoken languages which are not really given regional language medium education. So all these things are also in a sort of debate. So it actually becomes, the preservation of these endangered languages becomes one of the key features, at least in the Indian context. And over a period of time, let's say if these languages are lost, then the socio-cultural context is also lost. The diversity of these socio-cultural practices, community involvement, this is lost. And even it is a threat to the idea of globalization also. Globalization and technology developments have added complexity to languages and language policies. English proficiency is often seen as a key factor, but to save a particular language or to understand the socio-cultural point of view, I think language is the key element. Now, language encodes all this data, but in the NEP 2020, this idea has been strongly reflected. Now, that is to say, holistic and flexible education. That is like MEP 2020 actually advocates the flexibility in the education system. Breaking down the barriers between this arts and science, and it has this new era's requirement, that is interdisciplinary studies or multidisciplinary studies. Now, while they aim to have, the 1968 policy or 1986 policy, they were aimed to be more flexible, but maybe because of the resources during the time, or call it due to non-technology integration, maybe it had some clear lapses in understanding. But the problem lies here is that, irrespective of this technology integration also, this language barriers or understanding language barriers, I think like what I was talking about with regard to creating primers. How do we create that? So this is a long-term process. It's a futuristic vision that this MEP 2020 has, but there are immediate things that are quite necessary. Let's say we're talking about inclusive curriculum design. So in this inclusive curriculum designing, what is that idea that MEP 2020 would reflect? While these has some very clear implications that, with regard to MEP 20, the point that I would like to make is that inclusion of this Sanskrit or classical language. Now, MEP 2020 highlights the interaction or call it presenting Sanskrit and its rich literature and also the other classical languages like Pali and Tamil. Tamil is one of the oldest languages which clearly recorded. Now, while the other policies during 68 and 86, they were more of a regional language focus than Hindi, and they were not really clear on what happens to Sanskrit, Pali, or in the case of any tribal languages or those lesser known or less spoken languages. Now, community involvement becomes a key factor, and this I think NEP 2020 emphasizes with regard to lifelong learning also. That now emphasizing community involvement in education aims to provide a clear life learning opportunities to all the citizens, as well as these initiatives were there. The social economic development initiatives were also existing during this 86 and 68 policies. But the difference is that in terms of flexibility or in terms of inclusiveness, I think the present policy acts pretty well. But there lies a huge issue in terms of implementation in this diverse country. Now, it's one of the great things about act versus policy. See, in policy you can still make some actions, and you have opinions to give on. And I think this is the best time maybe this particular policy still have to evolve in terms of providing how we can implement this in mother tongue based education, or call it how do we implement it in such a big nation with great diversity. I think this can be answered only after maybe a decade or so. Like I said, probably the aim of the present policy is not immediate, but maybe down the line after a decade or two, the fruits of it will be seen. But the core attitude that has to be developed among the researchers of this country who are working on education, language, linguistics, and so on, is creating that literature or helping the government to make primers will also become a very crucial thing. Because see, it is not about just policy or implementing for social political needs, but any policy should be beneficial to the citizens of the country. Disparities they exist, and some tasks might seem impossible, but the time can actually provide better answers. Now, to give some brief conclusion, I would say that there are some concrete steps that have to be taken, and this has to be surrounded majorly on the lesser known languages or languages that we call it as minority languages and so on. Now, this debate can only give fruits if these people, like linguists, like people from education, sociology, they come together to give a better framework. Now, the need for critically evaluating the policy framework, rights of minority language communities and so on have to be, like I said, taken into consideration. So I think this policy will have a clear implication on. It is good to see that there are some languages that are already taking a shape of implementation by going through basic education, like in class 1, 2, 3. These primers are being used in some of the tribal languages, but not in any. So it is a long-term plan for to see some great work in the future by policymakers and academicians. So this is a brief idea that we gave. Thank you so much. Once again, we thank the FEL for organizing this wonderful conference. Thank you so much. And these are some references of, there are some future recommendations also we made. Because of this decade of indigenous languages, I think there should be more concentration on these languages and so on. You can see that. And these are a few works that we refer to. Thank you all. If there is anything, you can kindly mail it to us. Any question or any collaboration also, we will be very happy to work on. Thank you everyone. Have a nice day.
Well, just the thing about India, that's all. Since we don't have much. Thank you.
Thank you. So we move to our second speaker, Professor Hakim El-Mazarov from Institute of Ismaili Studies in London. You have the floor, you have 30 minutes. Wait, 20 minutes. Almost for discussion. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So can you help?
Assalamu alaikum. It's a really great honor to be here, and I want first of all to thank Professor Yamina and her team for doing a lot of work behind the scene to make this happen, and we with the FEL, I think very grateful. I'm also pleased to see our founding chair here, Dr. Nicholas Osler, and Chris and Salam to be here. Well, I come from Central Asia. I'm sure you are familiar with the region. It was one of the dynamic regions of Islamic history, especially in 10th, 11th century. And many Islamic intellectuals actually come from the area. Yesterday we were taking a tram, and I was very pleased to see a bus, a tram stop called Ibn Sina. I believe this is the same Avicenna, who is well known in the West and in the Arabic world, who come from Central Asia as well. And he created most of his works in Arabic, because Arabic, just like today, English was the language which you could spread the knowledge and engage in intellectual discourse. But he also wrote a book in his mother tongue. It's called Danishnama, which means the book of knowledge. And he really tried to present the values, the ethics, the cultural environment of Central Asia in order to demonstrate that knowledge, that culture is also valuable. And I think not many people realize that, but in Tajik, Persian, Arabic literature, especially in Persian literature, scholars were conscious about their mother tongue. We had a scholar called Sadi Shirazi from Iran, and he has a poem where he says, هر کس که با زبان خود سخندان گردد دانستن صد زبان آسان گردد. Whoever masters his mother tongue, the learning of the 1,000 languages will be easy for him. So that's, I think, just what preamble of my speech, but I'm going to talk about the endangered languages which are spoken in the mountain region of Central Asia, in the Pamir region, and Pamir is takes a large part of the heart of the mountain areas where some of the highest mountains come together. It's been known as a roof of the world by local people. It's a vast desert area, but it's a very high altitude. It's also home to diverse ethnic groups who are known by different languages, but mostly Pamiri. The Russian scholars who initiated the study of these languages called them Pamiri languages, and that language, that term became also part of the identity of the inhabitants of this mountain area. So we have in that mountain area, most of the endangered languages in the Central Asia are preserved, namely in that mountain area. They also sort of maintain the what we call the marks of the ancient traditions and cultures, which at some point dominated the cultural landscape of Central Asia. You've probably heard of Scythians, Bactrians, and Sogdians, who occupied actually Scythians, for example, from the whole Eastern Europe till north of India. They spread and they carried with them some of their traditions and cultures which today preserved in the mountain area. So when scholars explore the Pamiri languages, they find that their commonality to these ancient traditions and cultures. The other important part is the Silk Road. I mean, I'm sure you heard of it, which went through one of the routes of the Silk Road, also passed through Central Asia, through the Pamir area. So we see the amalgamation of various traditions and cultures in the areas, and at the same time that is mostly expressed in their languages. But not just in the languages, in their cultural traditions and practices itself. So the communities in general, they identify themselves as Pamirians, but also the whole region is also known as Badashani, so they also identify themselves as Badashanis. And in religious terms, they adhere the Ismaili tradition, which is part of the Shia Islam. So in some sense also their religious identity is also becoming prominent, especially in recent years. Now, there are around 10 Pamiri languages, and dialect scholars identify them differently, but the largest group is the Shoghni Rushani group. It includes the languages like Batangi, Sarikoli, Oroshorbi, Wahi, Sangalichi, Yazgulami, and Ishkashimi. I put them in order of the level of endangerment. So Shoghni Rushani, for example, it is the largest representation. Their number fluctuates between 100,000 and 80,000. And the Ishkashimi language is the most endangered. There are only around 1,000 speakers of this language. Now, the language situation in the region, particularly the mountain region itself, it is divided today between two countries, like northern Pakistan, western China, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan. So in Tajikistan, which was part of the former Soviet Union, we observed the appropriation of language policies which existed during Soviet time. Okay? The main definition of the nation in Soviet time was a nation is a unified by a common language, territory, economic life, psychological makeup. So one nation meant one language. And I think that situation was earlier described in the case of North Africa. It's very common. But interestingly, in Tajikistan, the constitution, the law, made provision for the preservation of the Pamiri languages, and it states that Pamiri languages as a distinctive and historical languages which should be preserved and promoted. And that's the end of the promotion of the endangered these languages. At the level of the policies, it's mentioned that, but in practice, nothing is being done to promote these languages, so there is a rhetoric and reality. Interestingly, when there are, in the case of, like we mentioned, Amazigh, I think that there are provisions as well, but not, and a lot of activities are going, but some resistance from the sides of the parents. In this case, when there are no provisions, no practical activities by the government, it sort of people look at it as a struggle for justice. And in that sense, their language, promoting the language becomes important for preserving their identity and achieving sort of a social justice in the society. So there were some awareness, that factor created some awareness by the communities which tried to promote their languages, but because of a lack of resources, financial support, that advancement is not noticed. So there are no written script. At academic level, scholars use Latin, even Arabic script in some countries for these Pamiri languages, but from the government side, it's not taught, it's not allowed to promote in the education system. The situation is similar in other countries, but there are certain differences. Like in Afghan side, the government is not concerned about the languages right now, and it has been the case for the last couple of decades. So that was allowed that in some sense there were some activities going on to write textbooks and promote the Pamiri language on the Afghanistan side. But in China, where we have also Pamiri speakers, Sarikuli in Wahi, we observe a process of assimilation of these communities into the wider Chinese society. So even in school, it's only Han Chinese is taught, and in a generation, if the situation continues, in generation also, the community will forget their mother tongue. Now, just before I go to some cultural change, I think cultural change is instinctively linked with the cultural diversity. It was in the past, it was in the domain of the historian, political scientists, but now most scholars in various disciplines pay more attention to culture and the change in cultural diversity, which is defined as a change in the norms, ideas, values which are shared by a community inhabiting the geographical space. But interesting, the linguistic dimensions are often overlooked in the definition of cultural change, though it is through the language which the norms and ideas of the community are largely transmitted. But more lately, from the review of the literature, we noticed that scholars have tried to test the ideas on how the cultures may change the framework of the cultural evolution and social ecology over time. And thereby, cultural change entails changes in the behavior and psychological makeup of the individuals and the various ecological factors, including socioeconomic and political circumstances. Subsequently, the identity and traditions of the community change and evolve to project the cultural transformation which the community experienced. But the vitality of the language is contingent on the community's engagement with their own traditions and practices. And that's what we said about how the parents are interested it's the process of engagement which can take different shape, but it is essential for our elaboration understanding. And the ecological factors which define cultural change can be favorable in preservation of language. In the case of the Pamiri languages, in the context of Tajikistan and former Soviet Union, the economic and social development played a vital role, because first of all, the region which I'm talking about, it has seen unprecedented economic development. You know, the Soviet policy was for equality, for justice, and that was favorable for the minorities who took advantage of the situation. So let's we just give some examples of how tradition and culture is integrated into the language. In the traditional Pamiri culture, the Pamiri house is a central element, probably the most ancient architectural edifice in the region. It comes from the word cheat, right? But it's not simply house when people use it. So when we look at the semantic, cognitive aspects of the language, there are different levels, different dimensions to this definition, which includes house, family, household, tradition, clan. Even there's another word in Slavic languages, which also comes from the Scythians, chada, which means children. Okay, so this whole thing which is related to the family is embedded in the understanding of the term cheat, which as I said, architectural edifice, where most of the ceremony traditions of the community take place. Now here is this traditional house. You can see two structures. One is old and one is a modern house. That's how the Pamiri house probably looked like about 100 years ago, and now it has been modernized. But if you pay attention, you can see that the main component of the Pamiri house are maintained. The structure of the house, it's been bigger, more decoration, carving, but the basic architecture is preserved. Why? Because it entails a lot of meanings in it, and people need to preserve the way it is built. So construction of the house can be identical to the constructions of the temple. The Pamiri house, the Pamiri people, they don't have, it's traditional, they didn't have mosque or prayer house, and all their religious ceremonies took place in the house. Okay? So it has this significance which we can look at some of the components, like it has 5 columns inside the house. And these 5 columns are associated with 5 angels. 5 angels in the Zoroastrian or Aryan tradition. And those are like, one of them Surush, the god of obedience, the greatness. Anahita was another angel, and it was believed that she was the embodiment of the beauty. So in the house, they kind of maintain the foundation of the house. But in Islamic period, they have taken different Islamic meanings. For example, the 5 columns are now interpreted as 5 figures in Islam, like Prophet Muhammad, within the Shia Islam, I mean his daughter Fatima, Ali, Hassan, and Hussein. So those are now taking this kind of a meaning. And some of the words which are preserved today in the Pamiri language are deeply associated with their usage in the Pamiri house. The main, for example, in the picture you see the main setan, the column which resembles it's the most important column where most of the traditional practices are held. So the other two, which are the entrance, you don't see the entrance, but they are definitely resemble Imam Ali and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. And next to it is a special place which is preserved for religious leaders, like we call them Khalifa. But the central element in the Pamiri house is known as the central one is a fireplace, known as Kisor. It is the place where the fire is maintained, and it should have maintained throughout the year, because fire is also a sacred element in the Aryan understanding. It's also the place or craft of the women. So it is the place where in the traditional house and all the where traditionally women would sit during all the traditional religious holidays and ceremonies. It's also the women, I think in one particular feature about Central Asian Islam is that the traditional forms of practices are mostly associated with women, while the formal, you can see it is more with the practices which are dominated by men. So a lot of practices in the house are held by the women. One of them is called like a strach, which is burning in incense. It has a lot of meaning with that, and the range of vocabulary as well associated with that, such as cleansing the physical body and the spirit. It is when they make the strach, when they burn that incense, it's applied to honor the ancestors, to cleanse the body from negative energy, and offering offerings to angels and spirits who are maintaining the house. So the fire is very important. If somebody passes away, the fire has to be turned off. So and then after 3 days, it is again revived. Okay, let me end here. Cultural practices, if we go deeper to understanding what they mean, it is a sort of a lifeblood for the survival of languages. The richness and multiplicity of meanings which people attach to those practices strengthen the validity of the language and the identity of the people. Search for meaning, harmony, and nature, and recreation and revival of cultural practices is also an important part of revival of language. In the picture which you see, the Pamiri house was rebuilt by the Pamiri migrants in Moscow. They just built a house resembling their traditional house in the Pamirs, and most of the ceremonies, like wedding ceremonies, they celebrate there. And that's an important element for these migrant communities to keep connection with their language and with their motherland. So, thank you.
So, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be here, first and foremost. I would like to ask about a clarification in terms of the Pamiri languages. So that means that they are not accents or variants of the same language, but rather there are different languages, right? So, like the point is how can we achieve a unified nation when there are lots of languages, and how can we socialize with others and create a community? That concerns the first question. My second question is that how can we avoid the languages of the elites, if I may call it that way? Exactly, how can individuals of a community avoid the inclination towards a language that is more used and that would create more opportunities for individuals? And I hope that my questions were clear, and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Well, the first question, the Pamir languages, they are diverse. Even in the Pamir mountain areas, you have one language is spoken in this village, and you go about 20 kilometers to the next village, and you don't understand what they are saying. So there is this kind of a variance between some of these languages. Okay, some are, if you listen, then you can slowly understand it, but the difference still big. So the question of, I think the question of what you say is that how can we build one nation if we need to be concerned of so many languages, and is it possible or not, if I correct that? That's what you are saying. I think this is the challenge which endangered languages everywhere face, where in most countries people are concerned about national interest, sort of. Even in the Pamir area, one reason that the government is reluctant to promote these languages because they are afraid of separatism. There are always this idea that, well, if these people know more their languages, they are likely to then demand some kind of autonomy even from the country, because the Pamiri language is spoken in the Badakhshan autonomous region. It's on the paper, right? But still, it's a big concern. Well, I think the fact that there is always fear that this can happen, especially at the top level, and that's one reason when the languages are not promoted, actually in practice. But this is like, the fear of teacher in school, in classroom. They are afraid to allow students to ask more questions, and they try to dominate and create that culture of facilitation, which is the challenge for them. Fair, that's I think the cause of it. But if you allow, if you engage in an equal discussion, you allow others opportunity. Like in your case here, they are giving this opportunity to learn the language, but their parents also have some kind of a resistance. So the states need to be equal and give those rights to every people. And the whole concept of this conference about the diversity, cultural diversity, is important, because the nations which do not promote these multiple languages, they're actually diminishing the cultural diversity in the area, and they are losing from that. Your second question was?
How to avoid a powerful language, the language of elite.
Dominant language.
How to avoid, I think it's related to first question, right? It's the dominant language, the majority, the power holders, they hold it. It's in every country. How to avoid it is a good question, because it has its own minuses and advantages and disadvantages as well, right? The elite, what you call it, in a sense, are leading the society, right? They're an important part of the society. It's just people look into them as a model, and they should use their power to show the justice in relation to others. But if they don't, they turn it to authoritarian or dictatorship. I think they will lose that privilege of being called as elite.
Last remark, sorry, just one last remark. I wonder, it always gives me this urge to bring back the rest of the world to North Africa, since this is where, and Central Asia to North Africa, you can see the similarities in this in many ways. I just want to urge people to read one of the celebrated French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. One of his earliest works was called La Maison Kabyle et le Monde Renversé. That is the Kabyle house and the upside down world. And it describes exactly how the society treats the construction of the house, which parts of the house belong to what represents the woman, for instance, what is the domain of the man, all in the shape of the house. Which pillar represents what? And there is this Kabyle adage which says that the woman is the central pillar of the house, for instance. And it's not necessarily about language, but all these things, the cultural diversity comes back here. And I just want to finish with something else I'm talking about, again bringing it. Hakim talked about Avicenna, Ibn Sina. And when you read 90% of European literature about the Muslim world, you always hear Arab scholars, of the medieval Arab scholars, medieval Arab scientists, medieval Arab jurists. And then you look at their biography. And Ibn Arabi was Greek. Al-Khawarizmi, who everybody knows here, was Persian. Ibn Said Georgiani was Iranian. Again, the same thing again. 9 of the most celebrated astronomers of the Muslim world, the medieval Muslim world, which are called Arab astronomers, were all Persian. Averroes, Ibn Rushd, was a Berber. Ibn Battuta, Ibn Khaldun. But then it's always the Arab scholar this and the Arab historian, the Arab thing. The history is changed, not by us, but by outsiders, very often. And this is the thing. Muslim is one thing, and he's just given us the proof, you can do that. But you have to, they're from Central Asia, they're from North Africa, they're things, and they're all things. And then we come to a guy whom everybody calls Leo Africanus. They were tired of calling him Abu Hassan Muhammad al-Wazam al-Fasi. They call him Leo Africanus because he moved he was from North Africa, he moved to Spain, and then when he went to Sicily, working for King Roger, then he became one of them, so he's changed his name again. So it's in the eye of the beholder, as the thing says. But let's come back to the real history, study your own identity, study your own history, and espouse it, take it in, own it up. That's what really counts, even if you say it in English.